All right, we're going to be reading today the very first chapter of my upcoming book on abiogenesis, the origin of life hypothesis. So I hope you enjoy. Introduction. Abiogenesis is one of the most hotly contested scientific hypotheses of the 20th and 21st centuries. The reason being not hard to understand, for since the first stirrings of spiritual curiosity spawned religious thought, the answers to where did we come from gave the answers to that question into the very hands of gods and spirits. The immanence of man itself, our special creation, endowed with the very spirit breathed into our bodies by an almighty and all-loving God who crafted us with special purpose, seems in countless minds to hinge upon the question of our earliest origins. What are we, if not the special creations of gods? What are we worth if we are a mere accident of chemistry? How can we take pride in ourselves as a special being if we are the result of mere chemical interactions in deep time that made the leap from non-life to life over an extended period of time? What worth can we have if we cannot have that endearing image of ourselves as children of a divine Father? I can only give my own answer to that question. How the reader takes it falls to them, because this is not a work of philosophy, but rather one of science, and in the pages that follow we will give a brief overview highlighting the beginnings of abiogenesis, false claims made regarding it, what science actually states, and what may happen next with it as study begins. What you believe after reading this, I leave to your intellectual integrity to resolve. I can only present the data. You can only choose an honest reflection on the facts, or their rejection. Whatever your choice, I wish you well. Table of Contents. Chapter 1, Creationist Objections. Chapter 2, Abiogenesis Proposed. Chapter 3, God and Science, What Does It Not Do? Chapter 4, Stages of Abiogenesis, Simple Chemicals. Chapter 5, Stages of Abiogenesis, Polymers. Chapter 6, Stages of Abiogenesis, Replicating Polymers. Chapter 7, Stages of Abiogenesis, Hypercycle. Chapter 8, Stages of Abiogenesis, Protobiont. Chapter 9, Stages of Abiogenesis, Bacteria. Chapter 10, Pending. Part 1, Creationist Objections. Creationist objections to abiogenesis are as numerous as they are riddled with errors and confusion. Sometimes this is deliberate, done by the dishonest persons who would muddy the waters for the sake of their own beliefs. Sometimes this is accidental, due to the complexity and relative obscurity of the subject matter. It is my hope that as you are reading this, you are either a person hoping to spread knowledge and illuminate the darkness of human ignorance, or a person who is aware that dark shadow surrounds them and is seeking the light of science to strip away the falsehoods that make up the darkness in which you are engulfed. If, however, you are one of those who deals in lies and are reading this solely in the hopes of finding ways to lie more creatively, then know this: any god worthy of the name would be ashamed of your worship. Now let us move on to this, the first and perhaps longest single section. Hey, Louis Pasteur proved life only comes from life with the law of biogenesis. That means abiogenesis can't be true. Wait, not entirely correct. The nail in the coffin that Pasteur hammered in was the coffin of spontaneous generation, not abiogenesis. Abiogenesis was not a coherently proposed hypothesis until many years later. Spontaneous generation's origins date back to antiquity, and it was considered the explanation for maggots on meat, worms in old cheese, and fish in ponds not connected to the sea or streams, and so on. It was eventually falsified for that, but was still believed for bacteria until Pasteur's experiment. He took 2 containers of broth, one easily exposed to the air, and the other having a long curved tube, see illustration below, which, while exposed to the air, trapped any entry into the tube partway down, and then he compared the 2 over time. The fully opened one showed ample bacterial growth, while the curved one did not, thus showing that bacteria was not spontaneously generated within suitable environments, but that it was carried in from external contamination. But Isn't abiogenesis the same thing? No. Matter of fact, it is not even close. You see, even when it was accepted for bacterial life, it never had a mechanism to explain how it could work. Abiogenesis, however, does have a mechanism, one wherein chemical assembly of natural organic materials leads from non-life to life. We will deal with this further, but for now it is enough that you see that there is indeed a difference. Okay, but aren't the odds of life forming by chance ridiculously small, like 1 in 10 to the 113th power? If something is considered to be mathematically impossible at about 1 in 10 to the 40th, then this is almost triple the impossibility. How can you believe that this hypothesis could be really true? Well, hold on. How do you calculate that? Let's talk a little bit about statistics. For starters, the odds of something happening that happened is 1. Yes, that's right, 1. Not 1 in anything, precisely because it happened. The odds of you getting up this morning was 1, because you did it already. But let's be a little bit more specific. How could someone calculate the odds you gave up above? And the answer? Badly. That is how. Badly. The reason it is done badly isn't hard to understand when you consider it. For starters, this assumes only a single chance instead of multiple simultaneous trials. As you'll come to learn, the most likely location would be hydrothermal vents on the sea floor, and there are literally dozens of those found so far since we started finding them in 1977. We've only explored about 5% of the ocean. If the percentage of the remainder is indicative of what we could find, there could be as many as 800 hydrothermal vents. Furthermore, the single trial is in fact not a single trial, but rather constant simultaneous trials going 24 hours a day, every day, for hundreds of millions of years. Now take into account that there are as many as 100 billion systems in a galaxy and that there are 2 trillion galaxies at a minimum by current estimates. So what we're really talking about is just probability acting on large numbers. This, however, still isn't all. You see, the most famous calculation of this nature that was ever performed was done by a man named Hoyle, who was an astrophysicist of considerable skill. And he decided to calculate the odds of life forming by chance. The problem here is that Hoyle was neither a chemist nor a biologist and did not understand what he was doing, and as a result, he calculated for one trial and he relied upon a modern simple cell, which even in his time, no one in the relevant fields believed was the first cell. The modern simple cell is still far more complex than the earliest ones believed to exist, and as a result, his calculations were skewed. His calculation has forever after been known by those in the earth and life sciences as Hoyle's fallacy. Hold on. Wasn't he a natural scientist? Shouldn't his opinion count for a lot? Well, do you go to a foot doctor for heart trouble? A plumber to fix your car? Do you go to an electrician when you need a lawyer? Probably not. Then why would you go to an astrophysicist for mathematical calculations in chemistry or biology? Okay, so that is fair enough. Wait a second. If proteins need DNA and DNA needs proteins, isn't that evidence that some outside system like God brought everything together? No. As a matter of fact, you'll see more about this when we get to RNA life, but the short version of this is that no, first life was not DNA-based, and so no, this is not the problem some of its detractors have asserted that it is. When they do make this assertion, if they are an educated person, they are attempting a form of intellectual fraud that counts on the audience not keeping up with the work in relevant fields. They are giving the faithful talking points, not hard science. Well, I look forward to reading about that in future pages, but shouldn't we see this kind of thing happening all the time? Shouldn't we be running into new life forming on a regular basis? Well, that is a great question, but the answer is no. Some have asserted that we should be finding life when we open a jar of peanut butter, but these kinds of statements are not connected to reality. For starters, even if that could happen in a jar of peanut butter, how many people check their peanut butter for new organisms when slathering it on bread? this book moves enough copies, somebody is putting their peanut butter under a microscope. It is statistically inevitable. More to the point, though, there are two chief problems with this. The first issue, how would you catch it at just the right moment when you can't spend all that long watching hydrothermal vents that close to the sea floor, and we haven't explored enough even to find those locations where it might come about? One might as well phrase the question as, why don't we see life forming in places we cannot microscopically watch, and that we have not fully discovered? The second problem with this question is, any occurrence of life of this sort would be inadequate in competing with the already well-adapted, well-evolved life that exists there. We already know that extremophiles, life which is well-adapted to extremely hostile environments, have thoroughly colonized these areas. So if new life emerged, it would be swiftly killed off. So no, we should not expect to ever see this happen. The low probability and low survivability and thorough remoteness of the areas where this is feasible make it so unlikely that an observation that it is completely dismissible right away without further consideration. Hey, but I read that the Discovery Institute said that only toxic chemicals were formed in abiogenesis experiments. Life can't be toxic. That makes no sense. Well, this is sort of true. Cyanide and formaldehyde are toxic, but they are also the necessary building blocks for compounds and amino acids. You wouldn't want to drink the stuff, but this isn't exactly a milkshake. We're talking about early chemical states necessary in a series of steps in assembly. Besides, those same experiments also produced amino acids, which you'll read more about later on in the book. By the way, while we're on the subject, the Discovery Institute is not a scientific institution. No institution which exists with a predetermined conclusion that exists solely to promote the exclusion of contradictory evidence can be called scientific in nature. They are not a scientific body and have never been one. But I heard that molecules that form the bases of RNA degrade very quickly. How could they hold together to make the precursors of life? A fair question, but the long and the short of it is that the enzymes that break down RNA components did not exist yet. That is like asking why a predator that doesn't exist wouldn't eat its prey. We could go into greater detail in terms of the generalized stability of early chemical compounds and the long-term stability of RNA and what material was involved, but suffice it to say that the pre-life, early Earth had an abundance of conditions ripe for stable and enduring chemical assembly processes. Okay, all of that is reasonable, but really, what about the radiation? The Jehovah's Witnesses put out a statement saying that ultraviolet radiation would keep this from happening. Stop. Just stop. Stop getting your science from religious organizations. Next, understand that ultraviolet light enhances rather than degrades formation of complex molecules. And by the way, while we're at it, remember the hydrothermal vents at the bottom of the sea? UV light is not a problem there. So you're saying we shouldn't trust religious people, that they're all liars? No, I did not say that. I just said to get your science from science resources, and they don't have to be lying to be inept, biased, and well-meaning but wrong. If you want scientific data, you go to scientific organizations. If you just want to reinforce your faith, that is not what science exists to do. If what you believe is true, science can only validate it. If what you believe is not true, science can only either falsify it or ignore it as non-falsifiable. But still, the fact remains that the Miller-Urey experiment did not create life. True, but that wasn't supposed to. The point was to create building blocks for life, and it was successful in doing this. So hold on. Didn't they use the wrong atmospheric conditions? Maybe their experiment would work fine on some other planet, but not on Earth. So doesn't that mean that this is impossible? True, they got that wrong. But there have been a number of experiments on this subject with varying environmental conditions, and they have been repeatedly successful in creating building blocks, and most significantly, the deep ocean and hydrothermal vents as a location make any concerns about atmosphere utterly irrelevant. We'll see more about this on the pages ahead. Okay, I was going to say that this is just guessing, but you keep mentioning experiments, so I guess they're not just playing guessing games the way I originally thought. I'd only heard about the Miller-Urey experiment, and I thought that was a failure. So I guess we should move on, shouldn't we? Yes, we should. Let's move on to part 2. Special thanks to talkorigins.org for compiling claims and sources. To participate in discussions with the author and other scientifically curious minds, visit here, facebook.com/groups/basementdragon, named after Sagan's Dragon Paradox. Thank you for listening.